How and why is Brad Marchand now a member of the Florida Panthers?
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Monday, March 10th, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your day. Available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today, we are still breaking down the shocking trade deadline moves made by the Bruins on Friday with Brandon Carlo, Charlie Coyle, and of course, Brad Marchand being moved out, and the Bruins moving forward without three of their key leaders, including their captain. Unbelievable. Before we get into all that, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins, and you can find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. It's been almost 3 days now since the Bruins drastically altered the future of the team by trading Brad Marchand, among other key players, including Brandon Carlo, Charlie Coyle. On the weekend, traveled to London, Ontario to go see Collective Soul, Our Lady Peace, and OLP, great Canadian band. They have a song called Life, and the chorus goes, "Life is waiting for you. It's all messed up, but we're alive. Life is waiting for you. It's all messed up, but we'll survive." I was belting that out, thinking about the captain, Brad Marchand, and just how messed up it is that he is now a member of the Florida Panthers, but we will survive. We're still alive. But it's still crazy to think. And even here on Monday morning, he was introduced as a member of the Panthers, wearing their colors, wearing their sweater, a hat. Surreal to imagine that he is now a member of the Florida Panthers. And over the weekend, we got some more insight into exactly how and why this deal went down. On Saturday afternoon, Emily Kaplan on ESPN reported about the fact that there was a 3-year deal agreement on the table, but they were apart in terms of valuation. And then Elliot Friedman on Sportsnet, Hockey Night in Canada on Saturday night touched on that as well. The gap in the contract talks is what led the Bruins to make the move at the deadline, at least according to Elliot Friedman. He reiterated the Bruins and Marchand had agreed on term 3 years. But as Don Sweeney said on Friday, there was a gap, and that gap was on AAV. Now, this part is important. Friedman says he didn't think Marchand was being asked to take a pay cut or anything like that, but I do think there was a sizable gap they obviously could not bridge. So there was a report on Friday, I think from John Butchergrass, saying the Bruins had offered him 2 years, $3 million per season. That apparently is erroneous, as Friedman, who I would trust more as a hockey insider, saying that he, being Marchand, wasn't being asked to take a pay cut. So it wouldn't be less than the 6.25 or whatever he's making right now on a 3-year deal at 37 years of age. But Marchand, because he's been on that team-friendly contract for so long, was asking for not just maintaining his current salary, but a raise over his current salary. And Friedman says it was a sizable gap they could not bridge. Now, Marchand, to his credit, took some steps to try to find some common ground. And Friedman said where things really went sideways was there was a point last week where Marchand asked for a face-to-face meeting with Bruins management. Didn't know exactly who was there, whether it was Don Sweeney, Cam Neely, Evan Gould, combination of the three, but it did happen. And in that meeting, Marchand asked for a compromise. He said, I'll compromise. I'll bend on some of my ask, but I'm asking the Bruins to bend on some of their stance as well. We'll find a way to get this deal done, because he wanted to stay a Bruin, but it just didn't happen. The Bruins had gone as far as they were willing to go, and Marchand, according to Friedman, was stunned by that, and it hurt Marchand that the face-to-face meeting couldn't get a deal done. So, to sum that up, they had agreed on a 3-year deal, or on the terms at least. Marchand was not asking for, or the Bruins weren't offering a pay cut, so at least the 6.25 that he's making currently on his deal. And he was apparently looking for gap more than that. He was willing to come down a touch, but the Bruins were not willing to move off of that stance that they had taken, which led to him being dealt to the Florida Panthers. And how exactly that came about was Marchand made it clear that he had one destination in mind, the Florida Panthers. Whether that's because he befriended Sam Reinhart and Sam Bennett recently at the Four Nations face-off, or he sees the Panthers as still the team to beat in the NHL. They added Seth Jones. They've made some moves to shore things up for a Stanley Cup defense. Also, former Bruins with whom he won a Stanley Cup in 2011, Gregory Campbell, Sean Thornton, both are in the front office down in Florida as well. So perhaps he wanted a chance to win with them as well. The Bruins probably didn't want to send him to Florida, but they relented, and that's probably why the deal was so underwhelming as well. A second-round pick, conditional first, if Marchand plays 50% of Florida's playoff games this season. And, Don Sweeney on Friday said he believed Marchand was about 3 to 4 weeks away, putting him right up to close to the start of the playoffs for his return. Apparently, he's going to start skating with the Panthers tomorrow. He will be in Boston tomorrow for a game against the Florida Panthers. Not dressed, but he's coming back home to say goodbye and to, just travel with the team. And ultimately, it would have seemed like the best decision to have accepted Marchand's compromise, bring him back, move forward, maintain the goodwill of the fan base. Even if he's not the player he used to be, he still brings a ton of value and experience to the table that you've traded Brandon Carlo, Charlie Coyle, two other leaders on this team. You maintain the captaincy. You allow him to record his 1,000th point as a member of the Bruins, which is just 24 points away. You allow him to retire as a member of the Boston Bruins. It's a weird line to draw in the sand that you're not willing to go over a little bit to keep your captain in the fold. A franchise legend, a Hall of Famer, a Stanley Cup champion. He will have his number retired at some point. And it's even more odd considering you just invested so much money in Elias Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov this past summer. And you also gave Jeremy Swayman a huge contract as well. So you're willing to pay Lindholm when Marchand, even 6-7 years older than Lindholm, Marchand's outproducing him, and you can't go that much further to accommodate your captain. That is the weirdest part to me, is that they weren't willing to bring Marchand in or retain him after spending that money last summer. That's already looking not great. So you are committed to Lindholm, Zadorov for the next several years, but you couldn't bring the captain back for a couple more seasons, even it's a bit more than you would have wanted to pay him. Anyways, that's how and why that all went down. We did learn a bit more from Don Sweeney in terms of his approach to the trade deadline, as well as what's next for this club. And we'll break that down here as the podcast continues. Are you looking for a snack that is both nutritious and delicious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack for busy days. Whether I'm snacking at my desk, on a road trip, or just need a quick protein boost, they're always my go-to. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Get snacking, get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. So I'm still scratching my head over the Brad Marchand trade. It is unsettling to see him wearing Florida Panthers gear. Look, a few years ago, I had said on social media that once Bergeron retired, it made sense to perhaps look at a Brad Marchand trade. I reiterated that a couple of weeks ago, saying it made sense. I was expecting a much bigger return. And the fact that the Bruins acquiesced to his request to be traded to one team and one team only, that limited the return. So the fact that they weren't able to bend and also traded him to the Florida Panthers, thereby limiting the return, that all kind of put a damper on what, and I maintain this, what was a pretty successful trade deadline as a whole for Don Sweeney. The key departures included Trent Frederick, Justin Brazeau, Mark McLaughlin, Charlie Coyle, Brandon Carlo, and Brad Marchand. They were all acknowledged by Sweeney for their contributions. He expressed deep appreciation for Marchand, calling him one of the greatest Bruins ever. These were difficult decisions, but the Bruins, he believed, had to make some moves to stay competitive. The Bruins and Marchand had value gap that couldn't be bridged. The trade was made to give him a shot at a contending team. 1 draft pick back, though, with conditions that could turn it into a first if he plays 50% of the first 2 playoff rounds for the Florida Panthers. Now, Sweeney's denying that this is a full rebuild, and I agree with that. When you have Jeremy Swayman, Charlie McAvoy, David Pastrnak to build around, as well as Hampus Lindholm, Pavel Zacha as kind of the new veterans on this team that are the secondary kind of leadership core, that's a good group to build around. And they acquired Casey Middlestadt, who we'll talk later on, had a very impressive debut for the Boston Bruins. They brought in Henry Jokiharu from the Buffalo Sabres, who that happened really late on Friday. I didn't touch on that on the trade deadline recap, but that's basically your Brandon Carlo replacement for now, and he looked pretty good as well. He and Middlestadt were both members of the Buffalo Sabres a few years ago, so my hope is that they were buddies and that they're pretty pumped to be reunited. You have Jacob Lauko coming back to fill in some gaps in the bottom 6. Nustidov, who looked pretty good, who has some offensive upside as well. And you'll also have some money to spend this summer on some potential free agents. Again, all of the moves that were made, it kind of takes the shine off when you know you have almost $13 million committed to Elias Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov for the last little bit. Zadorov has looked pretty good lately. Lindholm looked a bit better on Saturday, and my hope is that he will now step up a bit more outside of the shadow of that Bruins leadership core. Maybe it will give him the incentive to step up and assert himself as a core Bruin moving forward. Because let's be honest, he has really underwhelmed so far in his tenure as a member of the Boston Bruins. They have to improve around their core players. They did add Fraser Minton, Will Zellers as some enticing prospects, a bunch of draft picks, and overall, I thought they did really good here at the trade deadline prior to that deal. They now have their own first. They have the Leafs first next season, which is top 5 protected. They have 2 second-round picks this year, one of which is from the Blues in the Trent Frederic trade via the Oilers, the other being from the Colorado Avalanche in the Charlie Coyle trade. They have the conditional first from Florida. It will become a 2027 first-round pick if Florida qualifies for the Eastern Conference Finals and Marchand plays in at least 50% of the playoff games. If the Panthers don't own their first-round pick, Boston will receive their 2028 pick. They kept Morgan Geekie. They kept John Beecher. Those guys are restricted free agents, as well as Mason Lohrei, who will potentially be key guys moving forward as well. So again, it's not a rebuild. It is a retool. And to acquire a guy with a lot of upside in Casey Middlestadt, to acquire some depth guys in Lauko, Hnusnidov, to get Jokiharu in to replace Brandon Carlo. I mean, look, the haul for Brandon Carlo is pretty insane when you look at it. I would not have expected even a first for Brandon Carlo, and you get a pretty good prospect on top of that. The haul for Charlie Coyle was very nice. A second, a top prospect, and Casey Middlestadt, who's 7 years younger and has much more offensive upside at this stage in his career than Charlie Coyle does. They're not tearing down the roster. They're making changes to stay competitive. The power play has struggled all season, needs personnel and systematic adjustments. Defensive play has not been as tight as in past seasons. They're failing to close out key games. And having said all that, they're not tearing down the roster per se, but they took some guys who are kind of aging out and replaced them with younger, gave them some more flexibility for the coming off season where they can retool even more. They have to build a bit more smartly to return to contender status. You could argue that the signings last summer were a bit premature and not really that smart. Sweeney really thought he was doing something by adding to the team that beat the Maple Leafs in the playoffs and pushed the Florida Panthers to 6 games. So many things have gone wrong this season. They have Lindholm and Zadorov to not build around, but to, that they have for next season. The Bruins will have some money to spend in the summer. We'll, of course, look at all that as the season keeps going and as we get into the offseason. They did retain 50% on Brad Marchand, but that remaining hit will come off the books, as will Mike Riley's dead cap money, retention on Trent Frederic. They did retain on Brandon Carlo, so that's $615,000 against the cap for the next 2 seasons. But overall, Don Sweeney reiterated it's not a full rebuild, it's a retool. Charlie Jacobs came out and gave Cam Neely and Don Sweeney votes of confidence on Saturday after all these moves. I think that while that's somewhat warranted, it's also a bit premature because we need to see how this thing goes here. And if the Bruins are in the same position, say this time next year, then Don Sweeney really needs to be on the hot seat because you can't look at what he did on Friday. You can't look at what they're planning to do moving forward without taking into account those decisions made on or back last summer, right? You can't ignore those moves that were made. And again, the biggest issue with the Marchand trade is drawing a hard line with the franchise legend after spending kind of stupid money last summer that's aging like a glass of milk on the beach. It really makes zero sense. Now, most of what management did was productive on Friday, but a full vote of confidence I don't think is very warranted. Those recent signings, plus the Marchand trade, and a failure to kind of bend and meet him in the middle, should put Sweeney and Neely at least on watch. And things need to turn around pretty quick here. They'll get one more shot, presumably, at adding a head coach or picking a coach. I don't expect Joe Sacco to be back as the head coach next season. So Sweeney certainly needs to be at least on watch, not a full vote of confidence. Everything's great. Perfect work across the board. There were some very good things done, but the Brad Marchand situation really puts a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, and rightfully so. And if the Panthers go on to win the Stanley Cup and he's raising it as a member of the Bruins, then that's going to be really tough to take for Bruins fans. Now, on a positive note, this team came out and shut out the Tampa Bay Lightning on Saturday, and nobody saw that coming. We'll break that down here as the podcast continues. Are you looking to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor makes eating well easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and eat in just 2 minutes. With 40 options across 8 dietary preferences every week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether it's Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. Plus, Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfasts, and grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled all day long. The convenience is unbeatable. No prep, no mess, just great food in minutes. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 off and use code LockedOnNHL50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. Again, that's code LockedOnNHL50 off at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Now, after making all these moves on Friday, depleting the roster and trading a bunch of leaders in Marchand, Carlo, Coyle, lo and behold, the Bruins come out on Saturday and shut out the Tampa Bay Lightning by a score of 4-0. Jeremy Swayman making 26 saves for his first win since February 4th. One guy who I thought was a candidate to be moved was Cole Koepke. He came out and scored 2 goals. Mark Kastelik, Nikita Zadorov adding the other 2 goals. Casey Middlestadt picking up an assist on the second Koepke goal, while David Pastrnak recorded an assist as well to keep his hot streak going. A lot of emotions, of course, as they were just one day removed from these big trades. The guys came ready to play. Sacco said there was a determination in the room, and it was a solid effort all around. They got contributions from everybody in the lineup, and it was a good team win. Cole Koepke said of Middlestadt, he's a phenomenal player, loads of skill. When the puck's on his stick, it's in a good spot. He's always making really good plays and sees the ice very well. Unbelievable skill set. Just tried to get him the puck as much as he could and get open to let him do his thing. That was a pretty nice little duo that emerged for the Bruins in their first game. Jokiharu was a +1 with 7 shot attempts, 1 on goal in just under 19 minutes of ice time in his Bruins debut. And it was an unexpected result for a Bruins team that had every reason to not show up, every reason to kind of put their tails between their legs and say, look who's gone. How are we going to move forward here? But lo and behold, they did pretty well. Lauko, Hnustinov making their Bruins debuts this season. And it was a very good and unexpected win for this team, and they will be looking to keep it going this week when they host Florida Panthers on Tuesday. Now, there's not much to say in respect to the playoff push. I mean, this team could go on a run. Who knows? Definitely not expecting them to, but full credit to David Pastrnak, who could have definitely been upset, annoyed at seeing some of these guys that he has been playing with for so long being dealt. He did admit it is a tough pill to swallow to see guys that he's been playing with for so long to be gone. He said it's a very tough, emotional, sad, lost personally 3 really close friends, and it's a very tough pill to swallow. Not only lost big leaders, but great humans. And when he woke up Saturday, he honestly said he thought it was a dream. So much going on. The reality hits, and it was a little harder on Saturday to wake up to the reality of them being gone. But he said, "You're still a pro hockey player. You have a job to do. We are here to fight to the end. We are not going to go away. We are going to keep battling until the last game and see where it takes us." And I don't know exactly who the next captain of the Boston Bruins is going to be. You could make a real case for Pasta. You could make a case for Charlie McAvoy. You could go a bit off the board and maybe go Hampus Lindholm. But that, to me, what he was saying after that game on Saturday was pretty captainly to me. And I would not be surprised at all if David Pastrnak is the next captain of the Boston Bruins. And that would be quite a career progression as well. Coming in as, perceived as a offensive only kind of guy. He's developed into a superstar, one of the serving members of the Bruins, and potentially your next captain. And he was saying all the right things. This team is not just packing it in because these guys were traded. And in fact, Middlestadt, Jokiharu looked very good in their Bruins debuts. You have a couple other guys who can contribute in Lauko, Hnustinov. They are 3 points out of a playoff spot right now with only 17 games remaining. It's going to be a very uphill battle for this team. I'm not expecting them to make the playoffs by any stretch of the imagination, but that game against Tampa on Saturday was pretty encouraging in terms of the moves they made, the returns they got, and coming up on the podcast, we're going to have to do a deep dive into Brad Marchand's impact. I don't think it was an easy thing necessarily for the Bruins to make. Sweeney said, obviously, this one goes back a long ways. He's been around Marchand's tenure. Any player that he's had the privilege of getting to know and watch thrive and become a Hall of Famer, one of the greatest Bruins ever, he said. But they just could not agree on market value. And he met Marchand in the middle in terms of where he wanted to go. Now, they didn't burn it down. Casey Middlestadt, Jokiharu are here to thrive, and hopefully they continue to. it's now incumbent upon everybody to step up. There will be no captain named for the balance of this season. It's incumbent on everybody to step up. And so many things have not gone right for the Boston Bruins this season. I am still very sad that Marchand is not a member of this team, but we will continue to watch, root for, and talk about the Boston Bruins each and every day on Locked On Boston Bruins, because that's what we do here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'll be on the Locked On NHL podcast today talking about this with Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders, so check that out as your next listen. Please do subscribe to Locked On Bruins on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube so that you never miss a thing. And we'll be back tomorrow to discuss Marchand being introduced as a Panther, to preview tomorrow night's game against Florida, and to bring you all the latest on the black and gold here on the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day.